Do what thou swill be the whole piece of law.
As an artist, he lived a miserable, pathetic, but inspirational life. He's an artist that you've probably never heard of, but he is by far one of the most influential in artistry. Today, I'm going to tell you the agonizing, tragic, and insane story of Antoine Marie Joseph Paul Artaud. Antoine Marie Joseph Paul Artaud was born on September 4th, 1896, to an incestual union, which was quite lucky, because out of his mother's 9 children, he was one of 3 who survived, and his childhood was not much better, as he contracted what was diagnosed at the time as meningitis, allegedly. Because the person who would write his biography argues that it was a misdiagnosis, combined with the fact that, first of all, meningitis had a nigh 0 survival rate. Second of all, Artaud did not seem to experience any major symptoms of meningitis. And third of all, there is no third reason, but having 3 reasons sounds better. He was schooled at a private Catholic school. Now, here's the part where I must mention Artaud's parents were extremely well off. Well, he was about to run them into financial ruin, but let's not get there yet, at least. He was schooled at a Catholic private school where he began to read plays and poetry and somewhat practice theater, an echo of things to come. And right before graduating high school, I'm talking like 3 months, like on the cusp of graduation, he has what is described as a nervous breakdown. He burns all of his poems, he like stacks them up into a pile, burns them all, he sells every book that he owns to his nearby friends, he starts to give away all of his previously owned possessions, and his parents freak out. And he's struck with the insane urge to pray. Not because he was brought up in a religious school, not that type of prayer, but more the prayer of suffering from the weight of existence at the age of like 16. When this happens, he is 16 years old, and he already feels like God has put him into the wrong light already. Now, this could be because of his latent mental illness, which is going to be a prevalent theme throughout this story, or this could be the fact that the Catholic school might have not treated him very nicely. That's an unfounded claim, but people with religious guilt usually aren't treated well by religious figures. That's also a big allegedly. And his family would spend a ridiculous amount of money to try and cure him from this breakdown. He will be in and out of sanatoriums with honestly very little success. None of these methods to cure him work. A lot of them are mainly just primitive forms of, talk it out and we'll go from there. Or just, we'll lock you in a room for however long. However, during this stint of him being in and out of mental hospitals, he was conscripted into the French army for World War I in 1916. However, he never served. The reason why he never served is debated. He himself will say, it's just because I was sleepwalking. I couldn't stay in the trenches. But his parents, and I'm also going to take their side on this one, it's probably the lingering effects of this mental breakdown he had when he was 16. Because it does not get better. I'm looking ahead, it does not get better. You'll just see this get worse and worse and worse. And you'll think, man, he had it so good when he was 16, when he was just burning all of his poems and selling all his books and like giving his stuff away. Also during this time, he claims to have been assaulted by a random French... How do I say this nicely? He was assaulted by a man who has a lot of power on the streets, specifically with women. There you go. That is the proper term. He was assaulted by one of these people, and the way he describes it is you just beat him senseless, you just beats him within an inch of his life, and then he comes back to his senses and just says, oh yeah, I was possessed. Not by like a ghost or, an aberrant power, but just, I was possessed. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean it. And this will become a pattern throughout his life. It's theorized that he had a specific mental illness where he believed that people were attacking him all the time. Not like a persecution complex type thing, more like a people were physically assaulting him, and either he would be the one to bring this about, or they would already be attacking him and he kind of just sees this as a pattern. But you're gonna see this as a pattern because this is going to be a pattern. This will become a pattern. In 1917, he settles into a Swiss clinic, which, among other things, will prescribe him laudanum and electroshock therapy, and encouraged him to continue his artistic pursuits. And also, sadly, this is going to become a pattern. Mainly the drugs, because after he took laudanum for this first time, he gets grievously addicted. I'm talking like senselessly, needlessly addicted. He goes on about later in life how he can't cure it under his own power. He says something along the lines of, I literally need God to kill me so that I can be cured of this primordial illness that I was inducted into. And he coins the term the culture of the void, which is how he describes his existence. Just the constant need for laudanum, and he's just so empty. It's honestly sad to watch, because he'll move to Paris and he'll take up acting, and it's mainly for financial reasons to sustain his laudanum addiction. And he lives on the edges of society with a chronic lack of money, and he's homeless most of this time, just walking around the streets, not like selling his art or anything, like picking up minor roles in films and plays and just anything that will pay for him to get the next fix of laudanum, because as he says in the aforementioned quote that I was talking about, he carefully balances when he's on and off to a degree that isn't going to drive him insane, although arguably he is already insane at this point. But during his art career, he got his first touch of mysticism as he joined the acting troupe Théâtre d'Atelier. By the way, I'm going off of my 7 years of French that I was taught in school, so it may be okay, but I'm not going to advertise to be an actual French speaker because I have far, far lapsed in my ability to speak. Where was I? Oh yes, he got his first touch of mysticism with the acting troupe, and he allegedly would train 10 to 12 hours a day. But wait a second. Wait, why is the source written by Jane Goodall? Do you know who Jane Goodall is? She's that woman who researched apes for like 30 plus years. Why is she writing so many research papers on Artaud? Why is she going to be one of my major sources? This is anyway. He felt like he was learning some sort of untapped magic and power and these forgotten secrets from the troupe's leader, Dulin. He introduced him to a Chinese style of play called Zaju. It's a drama style somewhere between European theater and geisha. I'm probably describing it very badly, but it's a very nice integration of what we would consider a modern play scene with the stereotypical Eastern mysticism of the 1910s. And not to drop Dulin, he also took a specific interest in Japanese theater, although he wouldn't necessarily see that through until he and Artaud had parted ways. Artaud, however, getting back to the main subject, took a specific interest in Balinese music and performances, specifically citing that this was before Western civilization, and the sort of primal magic and energy that he was looking to tap into, with a sort of hypnotic effect taking over the watcher and listener. However, his time with the Théâtre d'Atelier was very short, as he left the troupe in 1923, and things would only get worse, as in 1924, he would be cut off from all financial assistance from his family, not because of any malicious intent, or because his parents didn't love him, but mainly because his father passed away. And he then became deeply involved in the Surrealist movement. Now, this is a whole can of worms that I'm not going to open because it has been discussed to death by art types that I am not, so I will leave it to the art types to discuss Surrealism. but I will give you the main gist of it, is that it's going to be a deep theme in Artaud's life, with its core belief of despising the modern society, and of course, living in a laudanum stupor for most of his life, and living in a waking unconscious state. It drew upon the latent mysticism that Artaud was already attempting to seek out and tap into. As the best way I can describe surrealism is with anti-memes and non-sequiturs and the types of images you see and you just laugh at it because it's so ridiculous, or like bone-hurting juice, like that style of stuff. That is the best way that I can put surrealism into the modern culture. Or like the image of the cow ball. That's the image of the cow ball is a really good example of surrealism. However, Artaud, seemingly, even though he's been doing nothing but pursuing mysticism and trying to tap into magic, he tried to make surrealism more scientific. As when he was put in charge of a surrealist art institute, he wanted to pivot more towards hard numbers research, more basing surrealism in science, rather than just recording dreams like he was supposed to. You know, the "have you seen this guy in your dreams?" I like to think that Artaud and the surrealists just put out that type of flyer and said, come here to record your dreams, and it's not any analog horror. You just sit down and have some French guy ask you questions about what you dreamed last night, and you're having a hard time describing it because, first of all, you can't really remember it, because unless you're keeping a dedicated dream diary, it's kind of hard. And also, just, the dream you had last night was pretty awkward. You don't want to tell it to some random guy, so you just kind of have to lie, and then they base their movement off of, you know, exactly what you're telling them. But Artaud fervently split with the group after writing 2 articles for the magazine La Révolution Surréaliste. Mainly because, if you couldn't tell by the title of the magazine, the surrealist movement in France had communard leanings, or for the people in the West, communist leanings. And just to let you know, he basically agreed with everything they were doing in the art scene. He just hated communism. This doesn't come up much in the story, except for one other time, but he just hates communism. He hates politics in general. He also hates people who try and put their thoughts into writing, as you'll see later. But he's just very fervently anti-art. Sorry, he is fervently anti-politics. If he were anti-art, he wouldn't be an artist. But to be fair, there are artists like that, so slip of the tongue, I suppose. Also, let it not be lost that he also split due to the subtleties of surrealism. Artaud wanted to tap a lot more into the underlying madness, rather than the non sequiturs and uniqueness that they tried to impress upon the movement. Artaud wanted to tap into the messiness of the human unconscious and the fraying threads that surround every person's life, where what surrealism really ended up being without Artaud was cowball. I'm going to use that image a lot. I really love cowball. Anyway, he also sought more mystic and organic undertones, as it's a constant theme throughout his life that he wants to seek something organic, or he'll go to places or look for things that are before Western civilization. He really synced with the surrealists on hating modern society. He just couldn't stand all the politics that spurred up around the art movement. But after this split, he gave them the equivalent of, I'm gonna start my own surrealist troupe with blackjack and magic. And he founded the Théâtre d'Alfred Jarry in 1927, as he combined his version of surrealism with the avant-garde waves of its other founding members, Robert Aaron and Roger Vitrac, laying some of the foundations for his magnum opus years down the line. But we'll talk about that later. However, after 5 productions, no 2 productions were produced by the same person. Just an interesting fact. The theater closed down in 1929. Maybe this could have been on Artaud's ideas, or upon the expression not landing as he intended. I say that because Artaud, as previously mentioned, disdained most forms of writing, and many of his ideas, like for example later in life, he'll say that he needs to invent a language that is around like half emotion, half spoken word, and some other inklings of understanding. if you want a very, very niche reference, think Sandy Peterson's Aklo in the D&D Lovecraftian expansion. It's almost exactly what Artaud describes. But anyway, he relies mainly on a psychic connection to the viewers, and he wants to tie the viewers more to experiences and feelings rather than things that he views as pointless, like dialogue being, comprehensible, or, a concrete plot, or other completely useless things like not having screaming in every single instance of your... not having screaming proliferate your magnum opus like a plague. But once again, I also want to put out there that he is rampantly addicted to laudanum, and that probably didn't help with the theater's financial situation at all. His next major theatrical step is in 1935. He himself got the funding and staged 17 performances of Percy Shelley's Les Cencis, which, in case you guys don't know what that is, it is a 5-part drama inspired by a quote-unquote true story of a family in Rome, the Cenci family, of course, where the main character, Beatrice Cenci, is, how do I say this nicely, figuratively and literally violated through most of the play. She's denied the protection of her neighbors after her father threatens to remove her and her siblings from the play, conspiring to remove him from the play in return, succeeding, and then having the literal Pope sentence her to a fate arguably worse than what she would have gotten if she had just stuck with her dad, which is kind of horrible to say. Not to mention, Beatrice and her conspirator, which were caught, were very, very brutally treated before even ever meeting the Pope. And it ends the play on a very, very horrible note. So you may be wondering, why is this relevant? Why is this plot synopsis relevant? That sounded horrible. Why would I ever want to go see something like that? Now, let me tell you, Artaud looked at this and said, what if it were more brutal? What if it were more insane? What if it were more everything that the play strives to not be? Because what he puts on are, first of all, modified versions of Les Cencis. This is not a stereotypical telling of the story. He integrates other versions of the play, first of all, and second of all, he cuts out many of the monologues that would give context to Beatrice's actions. He then emphasizes the brutality of Beatrice's father and makes the events spasm. It doesn't want to be connected in a nice flowing way. It's violence and then short violence, and then it's disjointed and rickety, like the spasms of a dying heart. Artaud specifically wanted the play to feel disjointed, violent, and rancid, with no sensibilities left intact. There is nothing that he wanted to leave untouched. He did everything in his power to make it offensive to every single person on the planet. It exaggerated the importance of her father's sadism and hyper-focused on the abuse that Beatrice suffered throughout the play, especially the judgment scene portraying the wrath of the church and the hemorrhage of justice. And as you can probably guess by that description of the play, it bombed horribly. All the reviews were terrible. But there's one salvaging thing, is that Artaud laid the groundwork for what his future work would be. He laid the founding principles in this play for the theater of cruelty, his magnum opus idea. Wait, why is this source written by Jane Goodall again? Why did she write so many of these sources? Why did she analyze this play that Artaud modified? Okay, now, the theater of cruelty is something that has been analyzed by people far more artistic than I am. So I'm going to do it the way Artaud would have wanted, without words, just to give you an experience. But I understand this is not suitable for most audiences. If you want to hear it explained with words, skip ahead to this timestamp. If you just want to skip it entirely and just resume with the mania, because this is by far not even halfway through Artaud's insane life, skip to this timestamp if you just want to skip everything about the theater of cruelty. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, here's the experience. Now, I'm going to attempt to do this with words. All writing's pig shit anyway, so I haven't written anything down for this. Here it is. The theater of cruelty is Artaud's idea of what I like to describe as removing audience privileges. Because in a traditional media setting, the audience is given some sort of privilege, right? In a movie you watch, you're not going to suffer the same fate of, you know, a town's being attacked by a dragon. Oh, I don't have to worry about a dragon flying over my head. The theater of cruelty for Artaud is removing that privilege. He wants you to be that civilian while the town is being ravaged by a dragon. All of his attempts to bring the theater of cruelty to reality involve such things like putting the audience in the center of the stage and having events take place over them. Sometimes even, you know, hitting the audience with, you know, things thrown across the stage. He also wants the audience to be ground down to some degree. Not to experience it on a critical level, but a primal level. The theater of cruelty is supposed to grind you down so that you don't engage with it analytically. He wants you to engage with it emotionally. And it's mainly composed of screaming, it's composed of really loud, disjointed sounds, like beating of drums or grinding music, and that is all meant, along with the feeling that you're trapped in the center of this stage, to bring about that emotional experience. It should be exhausting to watch Artaud's plays, and I know that just sounds like I'm making an excuse for a bad actor, but I genuinely enjoy this concept. It's, as much as it sounds cliche to say, it's somewhat inspired my work, because I want you to engage with my media as us able to laugh at someone's insane life. Experience it emotionally. But if you experience it critically, I put things in there to help you understand. But even just trying to explain with words what the theater of cruelty is disingenuous to the medium. There will be an experience later that is in fact his magnum opus, where he tries to bring this to reality, but once again, I'll save it for later. I understand I'm saying that a lot, but you just have to wait. The payoff is extremely worth it. So, if you skipped here, I'm glad you made it through it. If you watched, I'm glad you made it through it, and I appreciate it. Anyway, let's continue with Artaud's life. So, after his interpretation of Les Cencis and the foundations of the theater of cruelty, he would get a grant to travel to Mexico. Any of you guess Mexico? No? Okay. He was looking for a more primal place, one that he said was before the origins of Cortez. He wanted to, once again, try and rediscover this primal energy, a primal place where there was a communal mindset. There was a binding of religion and culture and astral alignment. During this visit, he would visit the Tarahumara Indians in Mexico, and he immediately impressed himself onto the Mexican art scene, made, I don't want to say irreparable damage, but he made certainly a lot of changes to the Mexican art scene that I'm not going to go into. This video is long enough already. And he probably, once again a big allegedly, used his travel grant money to do a load of laudanum, as reportedly he's catatonic for most of his trip. And he's there for 10 months. And it was a turning point in his career. Now that may be insane because listening to this guy, he has 12 turning points where he becomes an actor and then an artist and then, a bunch of other things. But this is the actual turning point. Namely, he wanted to degenerate the culture back to post-colonial times. That culture pre-Cortez, that's what he was talking about. Go back to the Aztec, the Maya, all of these ancient civilizations that he felt had secrets that we can't understand with our post-colonial mindset. Whether you're a colonizer or a colonizee, he viewed this as a key point in which history diverged, and he wanted to degenerate back to tap into that primal mysticism. To do this, he took part in an Aztec peyote ritual where he suffered hallucinations, and he was brutally lucid. I'm talking like he's been on laudanum most of his life. He's been coasting, not in a good way, but he's been coasting off of that high mainly his entire life. And this seems like this Aztec peyote ritual brings him back to sanity. And he is brutally aware of his life situation, and he is not taking it well as he returns back to Paris. Now, after he returns to France, the next year, with minimal time in between, is probably when I'd say he has the Rubicon moment, where he goes off the deep end. And he takes a trip in 1937 to Ireland. This echoes his trip to Mexico, as he wants to degenerate back to the pre-Christian Irish to find a more pagan route, but also at the same time complete a Christian journey similar to St. Patrick. Now you may be wondering, why would he have a journey similar to St. Patrick? Well, he got a gift of a walking stick. This walking stick his friend had gotten from a Belgian painter, and he saw this as the knotted staff that Jesus carried, and he was looking to return it to the place where it was burned over 500 years ago. Also, I'd like to point out right before this trip, he failed to get married to a wealthy Belgian woman from Brussels, at which point he goes through the largest emotional recovery spiral, not in, doing any of the modern things like lifting or attempting to better himself. He goes deep into Kabbalistic texts. He gets immersed in tarot, and he gets amazing at predicting horoscopes, and he can basically recite the entire tarot card deck from memory. He then publishes an astrological text under the title of Les Nouvelles Révélations de l'Être, which he signed not by himself, not Antonin Artaud. He signs it, and I quote, "The Revealed," and he says the walking stick is going to be the nidus of an imminent encounter with the forces of evil and destruction in the world. He also cites that he was commanded to do this by Jesus, as he wrote back to France in letters to friends. But this is getting far into the weeds. How did he actually get into Ireland? Well, not the traditional way. You get a passport, you have the blessing of the government of whatever country you have the passport from saying, let me into this country. No, he goes in with no visa, no passport. He just has a letter of introduction with a list of names of a lot of famous Irish university scholars on it, saying that he has an appointment, and they let him in. I had more trouble at the border of Canada than Artaud had getting into Ireland. But that's neither here nor there. The more insane thing is that he lives in Ireland exactly like he did in France. He stays in the homes of just random people, and there's a lot of stories about people just trying to get the walking stick off of Artaud, and he doesn't leave it. Not even when he sleeps, he'll never part with the thing. Even when he's, quote-unquote, chasing women around, he doesn't give up this staff. He stays in homeless shelters, and he takes effectively the same journey of St. Patrick, almost directly to a T, ending up in Dublin, where he goes to the university in Dublin and meets with one of the scholars on his letter of introduction, who, St. Patrick bless him, calls Artaud blatantly insane. He says it in like a really nice, roundabout way about, he doesn't have anything going on upstairs. He's really nice about it, but he just calls him a lunatic. And also not well known, he comes into a conflict with the Irish police. It's not known how it started, But the resolution to it is that he loses the staff. He loses the staff of knotted wood that he feels is a key part of his mission in Ireland. So the next day, he then goes to a Jesuit college. He goes to a Jesuit college in Dublin. However, they are all on vacation. Literally all of them are on vacation. And he's not allowed to enter. Then the next day, he is arrested. He doesn't have a confrontation. He's arrested in a corner of the college grounds as he's just clinging to a small branch of a shrub that he ripped out of the ground. He's mumbling hysterically, and he's like on the brink of starving. It's just... And then, when he gets to the interrogation room, he claims not to be French, and not to be called Antonin Artaud. He claims to be a Greek man named Arlenopoulos. He's then deported in a straitjacket and institutionalized again in France. However, not before either, pick which one you want to believe. He was either, first of all, attacked by two of the ship's crew, which put him in said straitjacket, or two, following the pattern of his life up to this point, hallucinating he's being attacked, and then put in a straitjacket until he returns to France. And this signals a rapid downturn in Artaud's mental state, as he will not see the outside of a sanatorium or a psychological hospital until the end of his life. However, getting back on track, before the start of World War II, this being in 1938, he wrote by far his most influential book, The Theater and Its Double, where he outlined mainly what I've said already about the theater of cruelty. In The Theater and Its Double, he mainly outlines what I've put forth already, but in a more concise way. He outlines Balinese theater and its mystic, hypnotic influences, how he would produce his shows, along with the thesis for the Theater of Cruelty, along with a follow-up to the thesis of the Theater of Cruelty. And just to point this out, it's a miracle we have this book at all, as the original run of this book was 400 copies, and Artaud wasn't even lucid enough to comprehend that the book was released. He mainly had enough time to edit it, and then he was just whacked out of his mind on laudanum again. Now, you may think the German occupation of France might have changed a lot for Artaud's life. Sadly, not true. The Germans seemed, frankly, ambivalent or uncaring towards Artaud, and it was up to one of his old friends in the Surrealist movement, and also coincidentally a part of the French Resistance, Robert Denos, and he arranged to have Artaud moved to a psychiatric facility in Rodez, where, once again, he was given electroshock and art therapy. Now, here's where I'm going to illuminate a little of what this art therapy was, as earlier on in his life it wasn't well cataloged, as he wasn't really a famous person yet, but it's more cataloged in these later years what this art therapy really meant. It was mainly Artaud translating poems he liked, and his friend Robert and the doctor that Robert hired, Dr. Fredre, were trying to bring Artaud back to himself, as during this time, possibly after a mental break in Ireland with failing his divine mission, he would begin to dissociate from himself, and he didn't have a concrete understanding of the French language, as he would just insert syllables, vocalizations, and breaths inserted where he felt like they should be, rather than where they should be. But it gets even worse, as during this time at the psychiatric hospital in Rodez, he effectively made a new French language. He inserted random esoteric symbols into French and created a language that only he could speak. Now, I don't know if this is real, I don't know if this is true, but he claims, I couldn't find anything else on it, he claims to have written an entire book in this language called The Trois de Fali Tatar Fondi Fotia au Foutre Indi, which he claims could be understood regardless of a person's understanding of French, and for every person and nationality in the world to read. So he never translated it back into French, or any comprehensible meaning. Now, it's theorized that he back-translated the nonsense words of Jabberwock, and he supposedly believed that, as how he said, everyone on Earth could read it. So there was no need to translate it back into French. And on the sadder note, he was experiencing electroshocks during this time. He somewhat pleaded, somewhat negotiated to have them stop. And I say that because he makes statements like, oh, I've regained my sense of being. I've discovered myself again. You can stop now. And they just don't. I don't know if that's him pleading to have them stop. I don't know if that's him negotiating to have them stop, because no one knows except him whether he was actually okay to return to actual life or return to the real world outside of a sanatorium, which he never did, unfortunately. He was unsuccessful in either approach, whether you want to say he was negotiating or pleading. The electroshocks did not stop. However, in 1946, after the defeat of the Germans, Artaud was moved by his friends, namely the ones that he had not abandoned, but kept loose contact with in the Surrealist movement, to his final location, a commune called Ivry-sur-Seine. Although, this maybe was possibly a last laugh from the Surrealists, as Artaud, as I mentioned before, being a staunch anti-communist, was probably not lucid enough to realize that Ivry-sur-Seine was a commune, or, you know, a hotspot for the French Communist Party, or a hotspot for communist sympathizers, or, you know, any of those things. I think he was just there to ride out the rest of his life. Which, here's where Artaud makes his final artistic gasp, producing, first of all, 2 more books. Well, technically, it's more like compilations of writings rather than books. He has Lettres de Rodez, which is a compilation of his letters from his previous psychiatric hospital in Rodez, and Van Gogh, Le Suicide de Société, where he questions, in a typical Joker moment, whether Van Gogh was insane or just the surrounding society wouldn't let him be himself. He cut off his ear. He cut off his ear for a woman he liked. I think he was just insane, but that's my personal take. He also recorded Pour en finir avec le jugement de Dieu, also known as To Be Done with the Judgment of God, which I will call his magnum opus, as he attempts to place the entirety of the theater of cruelty into this, I don't even know what to call it, a movie? It was produced on the radio. I don't want to call it a radio show. I'll call it a radio experience. I'm not going to try and defile this with words. I feel like that would be exactly what he doesn't want. I will instead play a clip that every single Red Flood player will recognize. I'll leave a link in the description. I did not produce this. This is a remastered and retouched up version of the radio play that, by the way, has its own saga of being cut like 2 days before it was supposed to air, and then someone steals it, and then it becomes like a low-key artistic hit because you know, art people are crazy for stuff like that. It's displayed in House of Leaves, how you can like watch some guy go into a house, watch his mental state degrade to the point where he's like broken for the rest of his life, and art people just eat that up. I just love it. I love artists. Artists are so necessary to our society. Without it, schizophrenia wouldn't exist or be as popular as it now is. You know, schizo posting? That's artistic. Art is schizo posting. Quote me on that. I don't care. Oh yeah. Now, without further ado, I present to you Pour en finir avec le jugement de Dieu.
Révolter et parler de fer, de sang, de feu et d'ossements. Avance, invectivant l'invisible, afin d'y finir le jugement de Dieu.
I bet I got the Red Flood players with that one. You can't fool me that you have super events turned off. All of the comments on that video are just Red Flood comments. I know who you are, and I see you, and I appreciate you. Anyway, after After producing that radio experience, there you go, sparkly word, that radio experience, in true Artaud fashion, he will pass away alone, kneeling at the foot of his bed, clutching a shoe. One shoe, not a pair of shoes, one shoe. And allegedly, it is suspected that it is a lethal dose of chloral hydrate. Now, around this time, he was diagnosed with colorectal cancer. I don't know if he was taking it as a cure. He might have been unaware that this would just, remove you from the art scene permanently. But he was found by the gardener. It was a very sad scene. And as much as I haven't been showing it, around when he takes the trip to Ireland and he's clutching that piece of bush in his arms while he's just babbling hysterically, starving, and I like to imagine crying in the corner while the cops are just trying to bring him to prison. That is about the point where I began to feel real sympathy and sadness towards Artaud. He's such a deeply scarred and troubled man throughout this entire journey that he goes through. He doesn't have a break. There's no point at which he makes any concrete victories. He's always hampered by his addiction to laudanum. It's depressing, and that's what makes good art. I don't think the theater of cruelty could have been fathered by any other man. But of course, as with all artists, he left a massive legacy behind him. I'm looking at the video time. It's already way longer than I wanted it to be. This could have been the Francis E. Deck video where I go over all the rants, but I'm waiting because I'm using my days off to go on vacation. So this was originally supposed to be really short, but then it went way longer than it had to, and I'm gonna have to edit this all, and it's just gonna be a nightmare. Oh, yeah, sorry. Anyway, he has a massive, massive legacy, and I'm going to leave that to the art people. If you want, Google his work. Follow the link in the description to be done with the judgment of God. If you like that, I would look into him more. His writings are completely nonsensical, but he has a lot of scholarly work around him. He has so much influence on media. So many famous people cite him as influences, and he influenced art, philosophy, books, music, film, and politics. Wait, he's an artist. Oh yeah, wait, okay, I remember. He came up with the phrase, "a body without organs," as a political concept. Once again, don't want to go into it because I almost guarantee I'm going to do a video on someone who's going to mention it. If you know who it is, put your guesses in the comments. Or just give me ideas. I would love ideas. I already have a giant backlog of people I would love to do this for, but this is somewhat a democracy. If you want to shout up to my speakers platform, do something on this guy, let me know. I would love to fulfill your wishes, just as you guys fulfill mine, because I looked at the last video. It did way better than I expected it to ever do, and I hope and pray that I can keep this going. I would love to make entertainment for everyone. I love entertaining people. It's what I do. That's why I don't take my meds. Anyway, that is the life and times of Antonin Artaud. By far one of my favorite artists, but also by far one of the saddest people to have ever lived and walked on the earth. I'd just like to point back to that quote that he said while addicted to laudanum, talking about his addiction and how he basically just had to live in this culture of the void, accepting that he'd have nothing, accepting that he would be nothing. And to some degree, I have to have that. I can't know that I'm going to succeed, but I have hope that I'll succeed. Because just as Artaud was an actor to survive, I'm a scientist to survive. This is my true passion. That Francis E. Deck video, when fully compiled, that will be my licence. But anyway, not to ramble about myself too much. If you made it this far, I appreciate it. Only about 10% of people do. So I'm going to give you a special thank you. And if you did make it this far, tell me what you think about the body without organs concept, or just anything. Give me suggestions, give me comments, give me criticism. I'd love to hear it. If there's any way I can improve, if there's anything that I put in here that you don't like, if there's anything that I put in here that you did like, let me know. And I know I say it a lot. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.